They call me the king of markets, a man who built an empire from nothing but iron will. I have enough money to buy cities, yet I am the poorest man alive. My daughter, Lily, was once the light of this house, a whirlwind of curls and laughter. Now, she is a ghost in a silk dress. For 2 years, she hasn't spoken. For 2 years, she hasn't walked. I've hired the world's best doctors, the most expensive specialists, and the most rigid nurses. All of them gave me the same clinical shrug: spinal trauma, Mr. Sterling. Psychological blockage. We've done all we can. I was ready to give up. I had become a man of stone, firing anyone who couldn't bring her back. Then came Elena, a simple maid with a quiet voice and a heart that didn't belong in a house as cold as mine. I fired her. I threw her out into the rain because I thought she was wasting time with superstition. But then, I followed the sound of a whisper into the gold room. What I saw her doing for my daughter, kneeling in the dark where no one was supposed to look, didn't just break my heart. It shattered my world. And for the first time in 2 years, the silence was finally broken. The silence in the Sterling penthouse was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating blanket that muted the vibrant heartbeat of New York City 50 stories below. Arthur Sterling sat in his mahogany-paneled study, his eyes fixed on a monitor that displayed the gold room, a vast, opulent space filled with priceless artifacts, gilded moldings, and a child who looked more like a porcelain doll than a 10-year-old girl. Lily sat in her custom-built, motorized wheelchair, positioned perfectly in the center of a sun-drenched square of light. She didn't move. She didn't look at the books on the table or the expensive toys scattered around her. Her gaze was fixed on a point far beyond the walls of the penthouse, a distant place where the pain of the accident couldn't reach her. Arthur's jaw tightened. 2 years. 2 years since the crash that had claimed his wife's life and stolen his daughter's future. The doctors called it conversion disorder combined with physical nerve trauma. They said her body was healed, but her mind refused to believe it. To Arthur, a man who lived by metrics and results, belief was a flimsy concept. He wanted his daughter to walk. He wanted her to talk. He wanted his life back. He had just fired Mrs. Gable, the 4th nurse in 6 months. She had been too clinical, too focused on the charts and not enough on the child. Or perhaps, Arthur admitted to himself with a bitter pang, she simply wasn't a miracle worker. A soft knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. It was his butler, Harrison. "Sir, the new domestic help has arrived. Elena, you requested someone for the night shift to maintain the gold room and assist with the household transition. Does she have the medical certifications I asked for?" Arthur asked, not looking up from the monitor. She has impeccable references regarding her character, sir. She is a maid, not a nurse. But she has a way with children. Arthur sighed, a weary, jagged sound. "Fine. Send her in. Tell her the rules. No talking to the child unless necessary, no moving the medical equipment, and under no circumstances is she to interfere with the physical therapy schedule." Elena entered the room like a quiet breeze. She was a young, beautiful black woman in her early 30s, dressed in a crisp, simple Nana-style uniform. Her dark hair was neatly braided, and her skin was the color of rich, polished mahogany. When she looked at Arthur, her eyes weren't filled with the usual fear or sycophancy he received from his staff. They held a deep, quiet intelligence and a spark of empathy that he found almost intrusive. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice steady. "I am here to serve." "Just do your job, Elena," Arthur snapped, already turning back to his work. "The gold room must be pristine by 6 a.m. every morning. My daughter spends her days there. Don't disturb her." But Elena did more than clean. From his hidden cameras, Arthur watched her move through the gold room late at night. She was meticulous, polishing the gold leaf and dusting the Ming vases with a grace that seemed out of place for a maid. But it was what she did when the clock struck midnight that began to irritate him. She would approach Lily's bed. The child was moved to her bedroom at night, but during the evenings, she often fell asleep in the gold room's reclining lounge. Elena would kneel. Not just for a moment, but for an hour. She would fold her hands, bow her head, and whisper, "Is she praying?" Arthur muttered to himself, watching the grainy black and white footage. "I'm paying her to clean, not to hold a vigil." His frustration peaked on the 7th night. He was already on edge after a disastrous board meeting where his rivals had hinted that he was too distracted by his family tragedy to lead the company. He walked toward the gold room, intending to tell Elena to stop the religious theater and get back to the silver. He stopped at the heavy oak doors, hearing a sound that made the hair on his neck stand up. It was singing, a low, soulful melody, humming through the air like a heartbeat. He pushed the door open. The gold room was dark, save for a single candle Elena had lit, a direct violation of safety protocols. She was kneeling beside Lily's bed. Lily was awake, her large eyes wide, watching the maid. Elena was holding Lily's hand, rubbing it gently with an oil that smelled of lavender and earth. "What is the meaning of this?" Arthur's voice boomed, shattering the peace of the room. Elena jumped, standing up quickly, but she didn't let go of Lily's hand immediately. "Mr. Sterling, I was just..." "You were lighting candles in a room filled with priceless silk? You were touching my daughter with unapproved oils." Arthur marched forward, his face a mask of cold fury. "I hired you to clean, Elena. Not to perform seances. Not to pray to a god who clearly isn't listening." "She needs more than medicine, sir," Elena said, her voice trembling but brave. "She needs to feel that her spirit hasn't been forgotten. I pray for her because her soul is cold, Mr. Sterling. I'm trying to warm it." "You're fired," Arthur said, the words cutting through the air like a guillotine. "Pack your things. I want you out of this house in 10 minutes. Harrison will see to your final pay." Elena looked at Lily, whose eyes had filled with a sudden, sharp moisture. The girl didn't speak, but her fingers twitched against the silk sheets, a movement Arthur missed in his rage. "I will go," Elena said softly. "But please, sir, look at her. Really look at her. You are so busy looking for a daughter who can walk that you've stopped seeing the daughter who is still here." Elena left the room, her head held high. Arthur stood in the center of the gold room, the smell of lavender still hanging in the air. He looked at Lily. She had turned her face away from him, staring back at the dark corner where Elena had been kneeling. "It's for the best, Lily," Arthur said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We need professionals. Not that." He went back to his study, but sleep wouldn't come. The image of Elena kneeling, not in servitude to him, but in a desperate, hopeful plea for his daughter, haunted him. He turned on the monitors again, out of habit. The gold room was empty now. The candle was out. But then, he saw it. Lily was moving. She wasn't just shifting in her sleep. She was reaching. Her small, pale hand was stretching toward the floor, toward the spot where Elena had been kneeling every night. Lily's lips moved. There was no sound, but the shape of the word was unmistakable. "Elena." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He stood up so fast his chair toppled over. He ran. He didn't take the elevator. He sprinted down the grand staircase, his heart in his throat. He reached the gold room and burst through the doors. Lily was leaning precariously out of her bed, her eyes fixed on the floor. In the spot where Elena had knelt, something was glowing. It wasn't a candle. Arthur approached slowly, his breath hitching. On the floor, Elena had left a small, hand-carved wooden bird, painted in vibrant blues and golds. But that wasn't what stopped Arthur's heart. Beside the bird, etched into the dust of the polished floor that Elena had purposely left uncleaned in that one spot, were words written in a beautiful, flowing script. "The light is not in the gold, Lily. The light is in the step you take to reach it." Arthur looked at his daughter. Lily was looking at the bird. And then, she did the impossible. She didn't just reach for it. She spoke. It was a raspy, broken sound. The sound of a voice that hadn't been used in 2 years. "Birdie," she whispered. Arthur fell to his knees. The billionaire, the man of iron, began to sob. He realized in that moment that Elena hadn't been wasting time. She had been building a bridge. And he had just destroyed it. "Harrison!" Arthur screamed, his voice echoing through the silent mansion. "Find her. Stop her. Don't let Elena leave the grounds. If she's gone, find her and bring her back, by any means necessary." The hunt for the maid he had just discarded was on, but Arthur didn't know that the gold room held one more secret. One that Elena had been preparing Lily for, and one that was about to turn his empire upside down. The transition from the clinical coldness of Arthur's management to the aftermath of Elena's departure was like a sudden drop in temperature. Even though Arthur had ordered Harrison to stop her, the report that came back 10 minutes later was devastating. Elena was already gone. She had stepped into a taxi and vanished into the labyrinth of the New York City rain before the gates could be closed. Arthur stood in the gold room, holding the small wooden bird. Lily was watching him, her eyes wider and more alert than they had been in years. The word birdie still echoed in the corners of the vast room, a haunting reminder of the miracle he had almost stifled. "I'll find her, Lily," Arthur promised, his voice cracking. "I promise." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity that had nothing to do with corporate mergers or stock prices. Arthur deployed his private security team, not to track a rival, but to find a woman with no digital footprint and a simple blue uniform. While they searched, Arthur found himself drawn back to the gold room, not as a surveyor, but as a student. He began to examine the room through Elena's eyes. He noticed things he had missed. A small chime hung near a vent where the air would make it sing. A prism placed on a high shelf that caught the morning sun and threw rainbows across Lily's lap. And a series of markers, small, textured velvet stickers, placed at intervals along the wall, just at the height of a child's reach. She wasn't just praying, Arthur whispered, running his fingers over a velvet marker. She was mapping a path. The action shifted from the quiet penthouse to the grit of the city. Harrison finally tracked Elena to a small, cramped apartment in Queens. When Arthur arrived, he didn't send an assistant. He went himself, standing on the cracked linoleum of a hallway that smelled of cabbage and old dreams. When Elena opened the door, she didn't look surprised. She looked tired. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "I believe I've already been paid." "I didn't come to pay you, Elena," Arthur said, his expensive suit looking out of place in the dim light. "I came to beg." She spoke. "Because of you. Because of the bird." Elena leaned against the doorframe, her dark braids reflecting the flicker of a hallway light. She spoke because she finally felt like someone was listening, not just observing. "You treat that room like a museum, Arthur. A museum is where things go to stay still. A home is where things grow. Then come back and make it a home," Arthur pleaded. "I'll give you whatever you want. A contract, a foundation, a salary 10 times what I offered." "I don't want a contract," Elena said firmly. "I want the key to the gold room. And I want you to stay out of it until I say the miracle is ready. No cameras. No monitors. No doctors. Just me, Lily, and the light." Arthur hesitated. To give up control was to go against every instinct he possessed. He thought of Lily's raspy birdie and the way her fingers had twitched. The suspense of his own fear fought against the hope for his daughter. "Deal," Arthur said. The return of Elena to the Sterling penthouse marked the beginning of a transformation that baffled the household staff. The Gold Room stage began. Elena didn't just clean, she began to dismantle. She covered the priceless 18th century paintings with soft, colorful silks. She moved the heavy, intimidating furniture to the edges of the room, creating a vast, open sea of soft mats and sensory textures. But the most radical change was the prayer of the steps. Every night, as the city lights twinkled outside the towering windows, Elena would resume her kneeling position. But this time, she wasn't just whispering. She was engaging Lily in a high-stakes narrative. "The Sun King is waiting for his messenger, Lily," Elena would murmur, her voice a low, rhythmic melody. She would place the wooden bird on a pedestal 5 feet away from Lily's wheelchair. "The bird has a message, but his wings are tired. He needs you to take the message to the great window." Arthur watched from the doorway, breaking his promise to stay away, but unable to help himself. He saw Elena unbuckle Lily's safety straps. His heart leapt into his throat, an action-packed surge of adrenaline and fear. "She's going to let her fall," he thought. But Elena didn't let her fall. She knelt in front of Lily, her strong, mahogany-toned hands providing a steady, unmoving anchor. "The bridge is in your heart, Lily. Don't look at your feet. Look at the light on the bird's wings." The emotional weight of the room was stifling. Lily's face was etched with a terrifying effort. Her forehead was slick with sweat, her small frame shaking with the physical and psychological toll of trying to reconnect her brain to her dormant limbs. "I can't," Lily sobbed, the sound raw and heart-wrenching. "You aren't doing it alone," Elena whispered, her eyes locked onto the girl's with an intensity that seemed to transmit her own strength. "I am praying with my hands, Lily. You pray with your feet. 1 inch for the bird. 1 inch for your mother." At the mention of her mother, something in Lily's eyes shifted. The unreadable sadness was replaced by a flickering, white-hot flame of defiance. She gripped Elena's forearms. Her knuckles turned white. Arthur held his breath, his hand gripping the doorframe so hard the wood groaned. The suspense was a living thing in the room. Lily's right foot, encased in a simple orthopedic shoe, slid forward. It was only an inch. It was clumsy. It was agonizingly slow. But it was a movement born of her own will. "Yes," Elena breathed, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Again. The bird is waiting." But the world outside was closing in. Arthur's rivals, led by the cold-hearted Julian Vane, had caught wind of the chaos in the Sterling home. Vane, a man who saw Lily's disability as a weakness to be exploited to take over the company, arrived at the penthouse unannounced, accompanied by a state-appointed medical evaluator. "I have a court order, Arthur," Vane said, his voice dripping with false concern as he stood in the foyer. "We have reports that you've turned the Sterling heir over to an unlicensed miracle worker. We believe the child is being subjected to psychological trauma and physical danger. We are here to remove her for her own protection." Arthur stood his ground, the Sterling lion finally fully awake. "You aren't going anywhere near that room, Vane." "The evaluator disagrees," Vane said, gesturing to a stern woman in a grey suit. "If we find that child on the floor, or in any state other than the one prescribed by her doctors, you will lose custody by nightfall." The action shifted to a race against time. Arthur looked at the closed doors of the Gold Room. He knew that if they burst in now and saw Lily struggling on the floor, it would be over. The suspense was unbearable. He had to protect the Gold Room stage at all costs. You want an evaluation? Arthur said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Fine. But you wait here. 5 minutes. I need to prepare my daughter for visitors. Not a second more, Vane sneered. Arthur burst into the gold room. Elena. They're here. Vane and the medical board. They want to take her. Elena didn't panic. She looked at Lily, who was currently halfway between her chair and the pedestal, leaning heavily on Elena's shoulders. The girl was exhausted, her legs trembling violently. They want to see a sick girl in a gilded cage, Elena said, her eyes flashing with a fierce, protective light. Let's show them a master builder instead. She looked at Lily. Lily, the shadow men are at the gate. They want to take you away from the bird. They want to put you back in the silence. Are you going to let them? Lily looked at the door, then at her father, then at Elena. A look of pure, crystalline resolve settled over her face. No, she rasped. The transition to the final confrontation was set. The doors were about to open, and the billionaire's empire, and his daughter's life, hung on what happened in the next 60 seconds in the gold room. The tension in the foyer was a ticking time bomb. Arthur stood before the double doors of the gold room, his back to the wood, facing Julian Vane and the state evaluator. Every second felt like an hour. Behind those doors, his daughter was fighting a war that no doctor's manual could describe. Your 5 minutes are up, Arthur, Vane said, checking his platinum watch with a predatory grin. Step aside. If you continue to obstruct a court-ordered evaluation, the police waiting downstairs will be forced to intervene. The evaluator, a woman named Dr. Aries with eyes like cold flint, adjusted her glasses. Mr. Sterling, the reports we received describe a room stripped of medical equipment and a child being forced into spiritual rituals. This is a serious matter of child endangerment. Arthur took a deep breath. He thought of the velvet stickers on the wall, the smell of lavender, and the way Lily had looked at the wooden bird. He stepped aside and pushed the doors open. The room was bathed in the golden hue of the setting sun. The colorful silks Elena had used to cover the artifacts were gone, but the room didn't look like a museum anymore. It looked like a battlefield of hope. In the center of the room, Lily was not in her bed. She was not in her wheelchair. She was standing. She was leaning against the hand-polished brass rail that Elena had secretly had installed. Her legs were thin and shaking, but she was vertical. Elena stood 3 feet away, her hands folded, her head bowed in that familiar, quiet prayer. What is this? Dr. Aries gasped, stepping forward, her clipboard forgotten. She's standing. Vane's face turned a mottled purple. It's a trick. She's braced against the wall. Arthur, this is a choreographed stunt. He marched toward Lily, his heavy footsteps echoing on the marble. Get away from her, you charlatan, he shouted at Elena. Stop. Lily's voice rang out. It was louder now, no longer a rasp, but a clear, commanding tone that silenced the room. Everyone froze. Lily looked at Vane with a fire that had been absent for 2 years. I am not a trick, she said, her voice trembling with the physical effort of standing. I am the messenger. She looked at the wooden bird sitting on the pedestal 5 feet away. Then, she looked at Elena. Elena said the bird is waiting. I have to go to the bird. Lily, don't, Arthur whispered, his heart in his throat. He wanted to run to her, to catch her, to protect her from the possibility of falling in front of these cold, judgmental people. But Elena's voice cut through his fear. Let her walk her path, Arthur. The prayer is finished. Now comes the work. Lily took a breath. She let go of the brass rail. For a second, she swayed. The room held its collective breath. Dr. Aries reached out instinctively, but Elena's gaze held her back. Lily took a step. It was a staggering, uncoordinated lurch, but her foot hit the marble with a solid thud. 1 step, 2 steps. Vane was trembling with rage. This is impossible. The spinal reports, the atrophy. The reports only measured her muscles, Julian, Arthur said, his voice a low, triumphant rumble. They didn't measure her spirit. And they certainly didn't measure the woman who believed in it. Lily reached the 3rd step. Her knees buckled. She began to tip forward toward the hard marble floor. Lily! Arthur lunged, but he was too far. Lily's hands flew out. She didn't hit the floor. Her fingers found the edge of the velvet-covered pedestal. She gripped it, her knuckles white, her chest heaving as she pulled herself back upright. She looked at the wooden bird, then slowly, painfully, she reached out and picked it up. She turned around, the golden sun catching the tears on her face. She held the bird out toward Dr. Aries. The bird says, "I'm okay." Dr. Aries was speechless. She looked at Lily, then at Elena, and finally at Arthur. She began to write on her clipboard, but it wasn't a report of endangerment. In 15 years of practice, she whispered, "I have never seen a psychological breakthrough manifest with such physical force." Vane realized his play for the company was disintegrating. This changes nothing. She's still a child. She's still unstable. "Get out," Arthur said, and this time, the Sterling Lion didn't need to roar. The sheer coldness of his voice was enough. "And Julian? Expect a process server at your office by morning. I'm suing you for harassment and the attempted kidnapping of a Sterling heir." As Vane and the stunned evaluator retreated, the gold room finally felt like a sanctuary again. Arthur fell to his knees beside his daughter, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Elena stood over them, her dark skin glowing in the fading light, her eyes reflecting a peace that surpassed understanding. But as the adrenaline faded, a new suspense took its place. Elena walked to her canvas bag and began to pack the colorful silks. "What are you doing?" Arthur asked, looking up. "My work here is done, Mr. Sterling," Elena said softly. "The bridge is built. Lily doesn't need a maid to pray for her anymore. She needs a father to walk with her." "No," Lily cried, clutching the wooden bird. "Don't go, Elena." "I have other bridges to build, little one," Elena said, kneeling one last time to look Lily in the eye. "But remember the gold room. Remember that the light isn't in the objects. It's in the step you take." Elena walked toward the door, but Arthur stood up. "Elena, wait. You can't just leave. I'll give you a foundation. We'll build a center. We'll help thousands of children like Lily." Elena paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She looked back at the room where a billionaire had learned to be a father and a broken girl had learned to be a master builder. "You want to help, Arthur?" she asked. "Then don't build a center. Build a playground. And make sure the gates are always open." She stepped out into the hallway, leaving the Sterling penthouse behind. But as the elevator doors closed, Arthur noticed something on the floor where she had stood. It was a small, golden key. Not to the penthouse, but to the gold room. The transition to the final chapter was a quiet one. The action wasn't over, but it was changing. The gold room was about to undergo its final transformation, and the lessons learned within its walls were about to change more than just one family. The departure of Elena didn't leave the Sterling penthouse empty. It left it overflowing with a new kind of purpose. The silence that had once been a mausoleum of grief was now replaced by the rhythmic thumpclack of Lily's walker and the frequent, booming laughter of a father who had rediscovered his soul. Arthur Sterling did exactly what Elena had asked. He didn't build a sterile medical center or a tax shelter foundation. He began the Great Deconstruction. The Gold Room, the most expensive real estate in the city, was stripped of its intimidating artifacts. The Ming vases were donated to museums, and the velvet ropes were recycled. In their place, the Gold Room was transformed into the Sterling Bridge. It became a high-tech, sensory-integrated play space where children from all over the city, regardless of their ability to pay, could come to find their own steps. Arthur replaced the cold marble with specialized, shock-absorbent flooring that changed colors when stepped on, just like the river of light Elena had described. 6 months after Elena walked out of the elevator, the suspense of the Sterling legacy reached its climax. It was the grand opening of the Sterling Bridge. The penthouse was filled with the sound of children's voices, the whir of wheelchairs, and the steady, confident footsteps of Lily Sterling. Lily didn't need a harness or a rail anymore. She walked with a slight limp, a reminder of the battle she had won. But she walked with a grace that silenced every critic. She was the grand architect of the new space, showing other children how to use the sensory walls and the climbing stars. Arthur stood on the mezzanine, the same place where he used to watch his daughter with despair. Beside him stood Dr. Aries, who had become the medical director of the project. "You realize, Arthur," Dr. Aries said, watching a young boy in leg braces attempt the climbing wall, "that what you've built here defies every traditional model of rehabilitation. You've turned therapy into a narrative." "I didn't build it," Arthur said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "A maid with a wooden bird built it. I just paid the bills." But the emotional weight of the day wasn't over. As the sun began to set, casting that familiar golden glow across the room, a woman appeared at the glass entrance. She wasn't dressed in a nanny uniform. She wore a simple, elegant dress of deep emerald green. Her dark braids were pinned back, and her skin glowed under the warm lights. It was Elena. The room seemed to pause. Lily, who was helping a toddler reach for a glowing block, looked up. Her eyes went wide. "Elena." The girl didn't just walk, she ran. It was a clumsy, joyous sprint that ended in a collision of hugs in the center of the room. Arthur descended the stairs, his heart hammering in his chest. "You came," Arthur said, reaching out to take Elena's hand. "I heard the gates were open," Elena said, a playful spark in her kind eyes. "I wanted to see if the master builder was still working." "She never stops," Arthur replied, looking at Lily, who was now showing Elena the hand-carved wooden bird, which had been encased in a small, clear pedestal in the center of the room, not as an artifact, but as a compass. As the three of them stood together, the action of the story shifted from the physical room to the world beyond. The Sterling Bridge wasn't just a room anymore, it was a movement. Arthur had used his billions to lobby for holistic care laws, ensuring that no child was treated as a ghost in a cage. The suspense of the Gold Room had been resolved, but the lessons remained, etched into the very foundations of the building and the hearts of everyone who entered. Lessons from the story The Power of Being Seen. Lily didn't heal because of a new medicine. She healed because Elena saw the grand architect inside her instead of the paralyzed girl. True healing begins when we look past the disability and see the person. Wealth is a tool, not a destination. Arthur was miserable when he used his gold to build a museum for his grief. He became wealthy only when he used his resources to build a bridge for others. Faith in the unseen, whether it's through prayer, imagination, or simple belief, the unconventional approach often reaches parts of the human spirit that science cannot touch. The architecture of empathy. Elena didn't force Lily to walk. She created an environment where Lily wanted to walk. We cannot force people to change, but we can build the gold path that makes change possible. Letting go is the final step. Elena knew that her role was to build the bridge, not to walk across it for them. True leadership and caregiving mean making yourself unnecessary by empowering others to stand on their own. We hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that you can be the first to know when another chilling story drops. Also like, share and let us know your thoughts about this story in the comments. Thank you and see you in the next story.